I'm sure we've all been there. Some shady character comes along and tells you that the only way to make your app really fast and responsive is to make it a single page app. Well, now the next time that happens, you'll know what to say. This is what DHH had to say in his RailsConf 2013 keynote address. Single-page apps get to keep a persistent process of the whole JavaScript environment that they don't throw away between each section. Enter Turbolinks. Turbolinks is a simulation of a single-page app. DHH also said at the SF Rails meetup in August of 2012, the year before, that in his opinion, Turbolinks has a more significant impact than Russian doll caching in achieving perceived performance. Turbolinks is available as a gem. It's not actually built into Rails, even though it is included in Rails when you build a default application. So the Turbolinks gem can be used in Rails 3.2, 4.0, or 4.1. In benchmarks that Steve Klabnik created, Turbolinks ran up to 2 times as fast as not using Turbolinks. You do have to run your benchmarks in a browser. You can't just curl the page or run Apache Bench or something like that, because the whole point of Turbolinks is that it speeds up the loading of a page by not loading and executing JavaScript. DHH didn't bother doing benchmarks. He just said that he tried Basecamp with and without Turbolinks, and he found it to be a whole lot faster with it. He said, it's going to feel faster the faster your app is. If you have a really slow app, it doesn't look like Turbolinks does anything for you. But if you have an app that already returns a response in 50 milliseconds, then Turbolinks feels like a big deal. Turbolinks is installed by default in Rails 4.0 or above application, but these are the steps that you need to follow if you have a 3.2 app where you want to add it, or it's a 4.0 or 4.1 application that you have upgraded from an older one and now you'd like to install Turbolinks. First, you just put the gem in the gem file, and then in your application.js or application.js.coffee, you put require Turbolinks. This line has to go after jQuery if you're using jQuery, but Turbolinks does not rely on jQuery, so you can use Turbolinks without jQuery as well. The last step is to add data Turbolinks track true to every stylesheet link tag and JavaScript include tag that you have in your layouts. This adds a data attribute to the link or script element that helps Turbolinks determine when it has to do a full page reload because assets have changed. I'll go over that in more detail in a minute, but first let's go ahead and implement this in our application. Here's the app. I want to point out a couple of little changes I made to the app in order to demo Turbolinks. One is that when you move the mouse over a course name in the list of courses, you see this little pop-up tooltip. This is JavaScript that's making an AJAX call back to the server to get the course description. And I'll show you why I'm including that in a minute. And then the other thing to notice is that when we're looking at a course or a teacher or a student, the title changes on the page. It's not the same title across all pages in the app. Now let's look at the code. So starting out in the gem file, I'm just going to go down here and add gem Turbolinks. Then switch to the command line and bundle install. And now I have to go to application.js and require Turbolinks. And as I said, I'm going to put it after jQuery because it has to go after jQuery if you're using jQuery. Now we have to go to application.html.erb in the layouts. And here you see our asset statements. We're going to add data-turbolinks-track true to both the style sheet and the JavaScript tag. So we're back in the app after restarting it. Let's start with the home page. When I refresh that, it's a full page request because I've cleared my cache. And when I move the mouse over things, this AJAX seems to work. You can see down at the bottom of the page in the network tab, it's making those little AJAX calls. But keep your eye on the network tab when I click on a link. It didn't go up to the top and clear that tab and then reload the JavaScript and all the assets. Instead, it simply loaded it with AJAX. And you can see right here, it was the turbolinks.js script that did the loading. So as we navigate around, we're going to see that that keeps happening No matter what we hit, it's going to keep on making AJAX calls and simply adding them to the end of the timeline as if it were one big page making a whole bunch of AJAX calls, which it actually is. The title bar is changing. When I click on individual students and teachers, their names show up in the title bar. The back button works. And in fact, if I scroll and then click on something and then hit back, the scroll position is remembered as well. This really highlights one of the things that's nice about doing Turbolinks instead of rolling your own AJAX. You get a lot of the benefits of the web. You get things like permalinks, which let you bookmark pages, and you get the back button, and you get scroll positions working when you use the back button. All of these things would be a fair amount of work to implement by yourself if you were doing your own AJAX. So everything seems to be pretty good. There is this one problem, however. These tooltips are no longer showing up. The AJAX calls are missing. I'm going to explain how to fix that in just a minute. First, let's take a look at how Turbolinks does its work. It's useful to understand how Turbolinks does its work under the hood, so let's talk about that for a minute. The first thing it does is it installs a click handler on all anchor tags, and when it gets a click, it checks to see if it's an internal link. In other words, is it a link within the same website or to some other website? If it's not an internal link, then it just does a full page load. It just sets document.location. Then it checks the extension. Is it HTML or no extension, which implies HTML? If it's not either of those cases, like it's a JPEG or some media file or something like that, then it also does a full page load. The next thing it does is once it has passed those tests, it goes ahead and retrieves the page via AJAX. And then it looks in the head. This is where those data Turbolink track attributes come in that we implemented in the layout file. It looks at those attributes and compares the values to the same attributes in the currently loaded page in the head. If they're the same, then it knows that no assets have changed. But if the MD5 hashes are different, that means the JavaScript or the CSS has changed on the server, and it needs to do a full page load instead of just replacing the body. But if all of those tests have passed, it goes ahead and swaps out the body with the newly retrieved body. Notice that it retrieved the full page. It was not a layout false on the server side. It was the full page. So it goes and grabs the body out of the response and inserts it into the body of the HTML page. It also grabs the title in order to replace that. Looking back on this step for a second, checking if the assets are unchanged, one thing to note about this is that if the assets did change, then it's actually hitting the server twice for the same page. This is an edge case though, so you don't have to worry that this is going to slow things down. Overall, the user experience is going to be faster, not slower. But in this edge case, the user has retrieved, they're looking at a page that was retrieved before you redeployed your application. Then you deployed it, then they clicked on a link, and at that point the assets have changed, so Turbolinks gets it via AJAX and says, oh, now I have to do a full page load. I mentioned that there are some gotchas you need to watch out for with Turbolinks. Let's go over those.